What if the last place you were remembered was about to be destroyed and no one cared? Before we begin, let me ask, how are you today? How's your health and your family, everybody? All right, we've all been carrying so much lately, and sometimes a story reminds us we're not alone. Now let me tell you about Clara Beaumont. 70 years old, black, alone, and walking into the Lancaster County Courthouse wearing an old cloth cap, worn-down shoes, and an expression that didn't ask for pity, it demanded respect. They said she trespassed. But all Clara did was sit on the front porch of a house that once echoed with love, sacrifice, and survival. The porch of a home where her husband, a decorated veteran, taught their daughter how to ride a bike. The porch where Clara once kept watch as the neighborhood changed around her. That house was set for demolition. No lawyer, no family by her side, just silence. Proud silence. The courtroom laughed and the judge smirked. Until Clara asked for one phone call. One call to her daughter, Dr. Yvonne Beaumont, a civil rights attorney with fire in her voice. And what happened next shook the very walls of that courtroom. Lancaster County wasn't the place it used to be. Back in the 1970s, Maple Street was the pride of its black residents, a quiet row of modest, well-kept homes, shaded by tall sycamore trees and lit with porch lights that stayed on just a little longer than they needed to. Folks waved when they passed, kids rode bikes without fear, and Clara Beaumont was right in the middle of it all. She and her husband, Frank Beaumont, a Vietnam vet with a warm baritone voice and a laugh like music, had bought their two-bedroom home on the corner with pride and hard-earned savings. It had taken them 10 years to pay it off, but they did it without help, without shortcuts, and without ever missing a payment. They raised their daughter Yvonne right there. Clara worked part-time at the local elementary school as a lunchroom aide while Frank worked the postal route. It was an honest life, a black life, a life that didn't make the papers but made a difference. And then came Katrina. Not to Lancaster directly, but it sent a wave through every black community in America. Clara had cousins down in New Orleans, friends who lost everything overnight. That storm didn't just destroy homes, it exposed how disposable black lives had become. In its aftermath, Clara volunteered for emergency support programs, quietly helping resettle families that the system forgot. She never talked about it much, but one day, a letter came in the mail. It was from the National Civil Emergency Network. She had been awarded a medal for her service. She kept it tucked in a drawer. Frank died just a few years after that. Heart failure. Clara didn't cry at the funeral. She just sat in the front row, hands clasped, staring ahead like she could still see him in that flag-covered coffin. And then as people went back to their lives, Clara stayed in that house alone, yes, but rooted. And slowly the neighborhood around her began to change. You see, the city had a plan. It started with road expansions, then came redevelopment. Little by little, black families were offered buyouts. Relocation incentives, they called them, but what they meant was get out. We want the land, not the history. Some folks sold. Others didn't have a choice. The taxes rose so high, foreclosure came knocking. Clara refused to move. She paid her taxes, she maintained the home, but years of bureaucracy chipped away at her standing. The city claimed they had mailed notices about a structural assessment. Clara said she never got them. They said the house was uninhabitable now. She knew better. It just needed work. A few roof shingles, a plumbing line. Still, demolition signs went up on the lamppost nearby. Clara's name was not on the official notice. And then one day she returned from the store to find the front door boarded and a red sticker posted crooked on the frame danger, entry prohibited by city order. No one had called her. No one knocked. That night, Clara stood at the fence looking at her house like it was a museum exhibit someplace she used to belong. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply stood and remembered. The next morning, she put on her old cloth cap, the same one Frank had bought her one Christmas. She put on her best shoes, even though the soles were worn, and she walked right up the steps, tore the sticker down, and sat on the porch like she had every summer evening for the past 40 years. She sat for hours, until the police came. A neighbor had called. The officers told her to leave. She didn't answer. She just looked past them to the trees swaying gently above. They handcuffed her slowly. She didn't resist. They brought her in. No ID, no phone, no family nearby, just her name spoken softly, Clara May Beaumont. They booked her for criminal trespassing. No one asked why she was there. No one wondered why an old black woman would risk jail just to sit on a porch. The courtroom was plain no more than a dozen people in it that morning. Judge Richard Danton was known for his brisk, dismissive approach to minor cases. To him, Clara was just another checkmark on a docket. She stood silent as the clerk read the charges. She wore the same cloth cap. Her eyes met the judge's, steady and unwavering. "Miss Beaumont," the judge began with an unmistakable note of condescension, "do you have counsel?" She shook her head once. "And why were you on the property?" Clara answered in a voice that was soft but strong-aged, but undiminished. "I sat on the porch. That was the last place I was remembered." The courtroom chuckled quietly. The judge raised an eyebrow. "This isn't a sentimental matter, Miss Beaumont. The law is the law." Still, Clara said nothing more. He looked at her with thinly veiled disdain. "Do you have anyone we can contact?" Clara nodded once. "I'd like to make a call." A pause. The judge waved his hand indifferently. They handed her a phone. She dialed one number. The courtroom didn't notice the slight tremble in her hand or the way her shoulders squared themselves. 10 minutes passed. And then the doors to the courtroom opened wide. The silence in the courtroom snapped like a branch underfoot. Everyone turned as Dr. Yvonne Beaumont walked in, heels clicking against the tile-tailored black coat, flowing behind her briefcase in hand. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was commanding. Every eye followed her. As she approached the front, even the judge's pen stopped mid-note. Clara turned only slightly and gave her daughter a small nod. Judge Danton squinted. "And you are?" "Dr. Yvonne Beaumont, legal counsel for the defendant," she said coolly, sliding a manila envelope across the bench with quiet finality. "I'm also her daughter." There was a pause in the room, the kind of pause that hangs in the air when something sacred and serious is happening. Judge Danton cleared his throat. "Well, this case is relatively minor." "I disagree, Your Honor." Yvonne cut in with precise politeness. "It's only minor because of who's standing trial." The judge bristled. "You are out of line." "I'm exactly in line," she replied, placing a thick folder in front of her. "This is not trespassing. This is a property dispute wrapped in systemic neglect and processed through bureaucratic error. My mother still holds the title to the home." Now the judge leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Impossible! The house was condemned." "Incorrect. The city placed it under preemptive review for condemnation, but they failed to execute the proper notification process. Here," she tapped, "the first document is a certified copy of the last tax assessment still listed in Clara Beaumont's name, paid in full, on time." The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. And so is arresting a 70-year-old property owner without confirming her rights," Yvonne snapped. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight of truth does not need to shout. She turned to the gallery. My mother was not squatting. She was sitting on her own porch. That house has been in our family for over 40 years. My father rebuilt the back steps with his bare hands. I took my first steps on that porch. A beat of silence passed. The judge tried to regain control. "Even if she is the legal owner, she is Yvonne." Interrupted, pulling out another document. "The city issued a demolition notice without completing the administrative process. No hearings, no warnings, no public postings required under Ordinance 12B. None of it happened. We have evidence." The prosecutor objected, stammering something about needing time to review, but Judge Danton held up his hand. He didn't want a legal battle. He wanted the case to vanish. This was supposed to be a routine file and forget case, an old woman with no resources, no family, and no defense. Instead, it had become a reckoning. Yvonne continued calmly but firmly. "Furthermore, I submit to the court this letter from the National Civil Emergency Network, awarding my mother for her work during the Katrina response effort. While the city forgot her, this country did not." She passed it to the clerk, who handed it to the judge. His face changed as he read the letter, recognition settling into his brow like dust. Yvonne didn't flinch. "My mother has spent her life helping others, feeding children, supporting displaced families, tending to neighbors when no one else would. She has never once asked for anything in return. And now, you want to erase her. Counselor, no one is trying to—" "You already did," she said, eyes locked on him. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Yvonne let the silence hang. "Then I am formally requesting all charges be dropped immediately and an investigation opened into the city's demolition proceedings in the Maple Street corridor." A murmur rose in the room. "Now," the court reporter was typing faster. The bailiff looked over at Clara, who hadn't said a word since Yvonne arrived. She simply sat still, wearing the same cloth cap, hands folded in her lap, chin up. Finally, Judge Danton spoke. "This court will need time to review the documents." "You've had time," Yvonne said. "Now you have truth. Act accordingly." The judge, trapped between stubborn pride and irrefutable evidence, paused, then sighed deeply. "Charges dismissed. Miss Beaumont, you are free to go." No one clapped, no cheers, just the quiet sound of a gavel tapping twice. Clara stood slowly. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded once and turned to leave. But before she could step away, the judge spoke again, softer this time. "Miss Beaumont." She turned. "I didn't know." Clara's response was clear, unshaken, "You never asked." And with that, she walked out, shoulders back, step steady. Yvonne followed close behind, legal team in tow. But the fight wasn't over yet. Outside, the courtroom cameras had already started gathering. Someone had leaked the case to a local reporter, and within the hour, photos of Clara exiting the courthouse had hit the news feeds. Black woman cleared of trespassing charges proves city failed to repossess home properly. By evening, the story had gone viral in the justice reform community. Phone calls started coming in. Community leaders, journalists, civil rights activists, all wanting to know more about the woman who wouldn't be moved and the daughter who brought the system to its knees. The mayor's office released a vague statement. The city council scrambled to review property procedures. A few even offered apologies behind closed doors. But Clara didn't care for press. She went home, not to the boarded-up house just yet, but to a friend's place nearby. Yvonne was already on the phone with contractors and preservation experts. There would be no demolition. Not now, not ever. That porch was coming back to life. Because something far more powerful than concrete or bricks had stood there. Memory. And for the first time in a long time, the system had been forced to remember her. The house at 1426 Maple Street didn't change overnight, but the way people looked at it did. Within days of Clara's release, the house that had once been scheduled for demolition became the site of public interest. A small handwritten sign hung on the fence read, "This porch holds memory." The news stories didn't stop. Local journalists turned up in twos and threes, some just wanting a quote, others wanting to hear the story behind the woman. Clara turned most of them away with a soft, "I'm not here to be a symbol." But Yvonne knew it was too late for anonymity. "You've become a mirror, Mama," she said as they walked past the house one late afternoon. "People are seeing themselves in your story. Women, elders, veterans, black folks across the city. They're waking up." Clara smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to wake nobody. I just didn't want to be erased." Yvonne had returned to Lancaster not just as a lawyer, but as a daughter, forced to confront how deeply her mother's quiet strength had gone unnoticed. Her mother had never asked for help. Not when Frank passed. Not when the property bills mounted. Not even when the city started circling the house like a vulture. And now Yvonne realized that Clara's stillness had always been a kind of resistance. City Hall wasn't quiet either. The backlash against the failed demolition and the false trespassing charge sent ripples through the council chambers. The Black Caucus on the city council demanded a full audit of housing repossession procedures. Councilwoman Nia Harper, the only black woman on the Land Use Committee, stood on the council floor and read aloud from Clara's case file, emphasizing the failure to provide due process. Mrs. Clara Beaumont paid her taxes, she preserved her home, she raised her family here. The city tried to erase her because it was easier than doing its job. That ends today. Clara was invited to attend the hearing, but she declined. She said, "I didn't sit on that porch for a council speech. I sat there because my husband's hands built it." But Yvonne attended. She sat in the front row, her mother's file open on her lap. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was enough, a quiet wall of accountability. Later that week, Clara and Yvonne received a visit. It was Mr. Granger, a white city development coordinator. He arrived with a folder, an apology, and a subtle plea. "Ms. Beaumont, Dr. Beaumont, the city would like to offer you a settlement for the pain, the wrongful arrest, the mistake. And if you agree, we'd like to name the porch, your porch, as a historical site." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You want to make a plaque?" "Well, a landmark. To raise awareness. Preserve the story. We'd be honoring your legacy." Yvonne stepped forward. "How much?" He hesitated. $25,000. And a public apology. Clara didn't blink. "Tell me something, Mr. Granger. If I didn't have a lawyer daughter, would you be here today?" His mouth opened, then shut again. He lowered his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want your plaque. I don't want a photo on your wall. I want the house repaired. I want the porch rebuilt. And I want the city to offer property rights education to black homeowners. So what happened to me, don't happen again." Yvonne folded her arms. "We'll draft a proposal." Mr. Granger left with no signed papers, just the weight of two women's eyes on his back. That evening, Yvonne sat with Clara on the back porch of a neighbor's house, both of them watching the sunset paint the sky in soft strokes. "You know, Mama," Yvonne said, sipping tea, "you were always the strongest one." Clara chuckled. "Lord, it took you this long to see it." They laughed. But beneath the humor was truth. Yvonne had always seen her mother as sturdy, dependable, but she had underestimated how radical that steadiness was. Clara didn't march, she didn't protest, she didn't give speeches, but she never moved. And that Yvonne was learning was its own kind of protest. 2 weeks passed. Repairs began on the house not as charity, but as obligation. The city had to approve the structural work under threat of civil litigation. The demolition order was not only canceled, but expunged from public record. Meanwhile, Yvonne began gathering other cases. 5 elders in nearby districts had similar experiences: quiet evictions, lost paperwork, fake notices. One man, a Korean war vet, had died waiting for a court date. His home had been bulldozed 3 months after. "This isn't about you anymore," Mama Yvonne said. "It's about all of them." Clara nodded. "Then help them. Just don't forget I still want my roses planted in the front." "I won't," Yvonne smiled. She filed a class action brief on behalf of affected elders, calling for a formal restitution program, full legal reviews, and emergency legal access for senior homeowners. What had started as a trespassing charge had become a reckoning, a turning, a beginning. And still Clara remained quiet. She let others speak, testify, write, and share. She went back to sitting on her porch when the repairs finished. Fresh wood handrails, restored rocking chair, polished. People drove by and waved. Some stopped and said thank you. Clara always smiled but said the same thing. "I didn't do anything but sit down. Y'all did the rest." But everyone knew that wasn't true. She had done the thing no one else could do. She stayed. And because she stayed, others began to stand. The city council chamber was filled to capacity. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered into recorders. Community members, mostly. Black elders sat in tight rows holding folders. Faded photos, worn documents in manila envelopes. Some wore church hats. Others wore military medals or shirts, with block letter messages like "We built this" and "Not one more porch." It was the largest turnout in council history for a housing hearing. On the agenda, systemic failures in property repossession and homeowner rights. And seated quietly in the third row, flanked by Yvonne and 2 other civil rights lawyers, sat Clara Beaumont. She wore the same cloth cap, the same calm expression. The only new thing was the lapel pin on her sweater, her Katrina Emergency Service medal polished and pinned with care. The chairwoman of the council tapped her gavel 3 times. "We begin today's hearing with invited testimony. Dr. Yvonne Beaumont, the floor is yours." Yvonne stood. No theatrics, no raised voice, just her presence and truth. "My name is Dr. Yvonne Beaumont. I am a legal advisor in Washington, a human rights advocate, and the daughter of Clara May Beaumont, a 70-year-old black homeowner who was arrested for sitting on her own porch." She let the silence sit. "My mother paid her taxes, followed every regulation, but her home was still marked for demolition. Why? Because someone at city planning decided that her silence meant she didn't matter." Flashes of nods moved through the crowd. Yvonne continued, voice growing firmer. "But it was not just a clerical error. It was a pattern. I have documented over 70 cases, elder black homeowners, improperly flagged, poorly notified, or strategically bypassed in the name of redevelopment." She stepped to the side and held up a copy of the housing audit her team had compiled. 32 of them were widows. 12 were veterans or spouses of veterans. 14 were over the age of 75. None had legal representation when contacted by the city. She turned back to the council. "My mother's case is not unique. It is only visible because I had the training and the platform to expose it. But what about the others?" She gestured behind her to the crowd. "What about the women who raised generations of this city's children? The men who laid its bricks, who bled for it in war, who marched for it in peace and now get bulldozed out of history?" She stepped back. And then unexpectedly, Clara stood. There was a shuffle of surprise as the older woman stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Yvonne moved to help her, but Clara waved her off. She reached the microphone, adjusted it with a shaky but steady hand, and looked directly at the council. "I didn't come here to be famous," she said. "I just want to be remembered." No one moved. "My husband built our porch after his second heart surgery. He didn't do it for money. He did it because he wanted a place to sit with his wife. That porch was ours. That house was ours." She paused. "And when the city came and tried to take it, they didn't call me. They didn't send nobody. They just put a red sticker on my door. That red sticker told me I didn't matter no more." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. "I don't want revenge. I just want what's fair. For me. For the folks behind me, for the ones already gone. She stepped back. The room exploded, not in noise, but in reverence. People stood, quietly, one by one. A full minute passed in respectful silence. And then the council chairwoman leaned into her mic. Mrs. Beaumont, Dr. Beaumont, on behalf of the council, let me say this. We hear you. But hearing was no longer enough. That afternoon, the council voted unanimously to freeze all pending demolition notices for 120 days. They also passed 2 emergency measures. The Clara Beaumont Act requiring personal contact certified delivery and legal counseling options for any elderly homeowner, flagged for city repossession. The Porch Preservation Initiative, a city-funded grant to assist low-income seniors with minor home repairs, focusing on maintaining structural safety to prevent condemnation. It was a seismic shift. What began as a trespassing charge had become a policy revolution. Outside the chambers, people gathered around Clara. Young men thanked her for standing her ground. Older women wept and hugged her. You didn't just save your house, one woman said. You saved all of ours. Yvonne smiled, tears in her own eyes. For all her degrees, all her courtroom experience, it was her mother's calm presence that had changed everything. And still, Clara stayed humble. I didn't change nothing, she whispered to her daughter. They just finally looked. That evening, news channels from around the country aired the footage of Clara's speech. It was short, measured, but more powerful than anything delivered by a politician that year. That red sticker told me I didn't matter no more. I just want what's fair. Within 24 hours, advocacy groups across the country began using Clara Beaumont in calls to reform housing policy for Black elders. Interviews rolled in. Invitations from national publications, congressional panels, even a talk show or two. Clara declined them all. She sat on a restored porch, instead roses planted beneath the railing wind chimes singing softly in the breeze. When asked if she'd run for office, she laughed. I've done my part. Let the young folks carry the next piece. But every week someone new would come by. A former neighbor, a single mother, a student, a vet, someone who just wanted to sit and say thank you. And every time Clara would nod. Just don't forget where you came from, she'd say. Porches carry memory. And just like that, the house that nearly disappeared became a landmark, not because of a plaque, but because of people. Because of a mother. Because of a porch. Because of truth. The porch at 1426 Maple Street stood taller than it had in years. Fresh paint covered the boards, a soft buttercream yellow that matched the trim Clara picked out from an old Sears catalog in 1982. The rocking chair, once cracked, was now mended and stained a rich walnut. And the roses, her husband's favorite, had taken root along the front walk, climbing like history toward the sun. Clara sat in that chair most mornings now, sometimes with tea, sometimes with her cane across her lap. Always with her eyes on the street where the neighborhood had begun to move with new life. Children played again. 2 houses down, the Johnson family, young parents with 3 boys, had repaired their fence after hearing about Clara's story. They'd been planning to leave. Now they were talking about staying. Across the way, Miss Thelma, a retired nurse, had reopened her home for Sunday prayer circles. I didn't realize how much I missed this block, she told Clara one day. Your porch reminded me it's still ours. It wasn't just memory that had returned, it was presence. Clara never asked for attention. She refused television interviews. She politely declined a nomination for the state's Elder Leadership Award. I've had enough titles, she told Yvonne with a smirk. I just want my porch and my people. But she couldn't stop the letters. They came from Detroit, Baton Rouge, Milwaukee, Tulsa, handwritten notes from Black elders who said, "Thank you for staying," or "Your porch reminded me of my mama's," or simply, "You made me feel seen." Some sent photos of their homes, some still standing, some lost to time and policy. Yvonne read them out loud in the evenings, sitting on the step like she used to as a girl. She was no longer just Clara's daughter or a lawyer in D.C. She had become a bridge, and she knew it. I've been fighting in big rooms with small windows, she told her mother one night, but here everything's open, and people can actually breathe. You did good, Clara replied, not just in court, in coming back. Yvonne was quiet for a long moment. I didn't realize how far I'd gone. Clara nodded. Most of us don't, until we hear the wind on the porch again. In the weeks that followed the council vote, Yvonne began organizing the Porch Network, a local grassroots legal and advocacy effort focused on elder Black homeowners in aging neighborhoods. The mission was simple: to help people stay in the homes they built. They didn't need big funding at first, just a few volunteers, retired paralegals, young real estate interns, community pastors, and Clara quietly but firmly became the soul of the effort. Every Saturday, neighbors gathered on her porch for open office hours. People brought questions, paperwork, eviction notices, and grief, and they left with Clarity's support and a plan. Sometimes it was as simple as re-registering a deed that had never been transferred from a late husband's name. Other times it meant preparing for court battles. But Clara didn't miss a Saturday. "I don't know legal talk," she told one young woman, "but I know how to sit with someone while they're being ignored." She offered tea, space, and stillness. And still people kept coming. One day, a white woman showed up mid-50s, tightly clasped hands, eyes nervous. She lived 6 streets over and had seen Clara's face on the local news. "My name's Margaret. My father was, well, he worked in the city assessor's office." Clara said nothing. Margaret swallowed hard. "He filed some of those notices. He used to say, 'These houses ain't worth saving.' And I'm sorry." She reached into her bag and placed a folded note on the porch railing. Clara took it, opened it, and read silently. "I don't know if I can make it right," Margaret said, "but I'd like to help with the roses." A long pause. Then Clara nodded slowly. "We'll need mulch." That was how healing started. Not with slogans or sweeping statements, but with mulch, with tea, with memory, with listening. By autumn, Maple Street looked alive again. Not gentrified, not whitewashed, just alive. Kids started walking to the school bus in clusters again. The neighborhood watch restarted with 3 grandmothers and a whistle system. And every third Sunday, a local jazz trio played on Clara's porch, just like Frank used to play his records back in the day. The city tried again to name the house an official landmark. This time, Clara agreed with a few terms. No speeches, no statue, just a bench for visitors. And this, she pointed to the brass sign, "Keep it small." The plaque was no more than 6 inches across. It read, "In honor of Clara May Beaumont, she stayed, so we could remember." Yvonne smiled when she saw it. "That's all you want?" she asked. Clara leaned back in her chair. "That's more than I ever asked for." In time, the house faded from the news cycle, but the Porch Network didn't. Yvonne's team helped save 32 homes in the first year alone. Quietly. Efficiently. Some homes belonged to people who hadn't spoken up in decades. Others had lost hope until Clara's story made them believe again. And every time Yvonne handed over a final document, she'd think of her mother on that porch. Of the day she made that one phone call. Of the silence that broke a system. And of the woman who never had to raise her voice to speak the loudest truth of all. I belong here. That winter, the porch stayed busy. Snow dusted the roses, and Clara wrapped herself in an old army blanket from Frank's footlocker. Yvonne had taken a sabbatical from Washington, just until spring, she said, but they both knew it would be longer. Because sometimes the work finds you, and sometimes it brings you home. In cities far beyond Lancaster, Clara's name quietly became part of a new language. Not the kind spoken through megaphones or hashtags, but the kind whispered in legal clinics, scribbled in community newsletters, shared during Sunday service testimony, or spoken by grandchildren, helping their elders sort through paperwork. "We're going to do a Clara Beaumont check." That's what they began calling it in Newark, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Houston. A local nonprofit in Birmingham printed a checklist titled The Clara File, a simple form for Black homeowners over 60 to document ownership tax receipts and heirship. Not because she asked for it, but because she embodied what so many others had experienced in silence. And now that silence had language, procedure, protection. One housing lawyer in Memphis said we'd been screaming about this for years, but it took Clara sitting down to make people stand up. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A system that had for generations shouted over Black women was being dismantled because one sat quietly on her porch and wouldn't move. Even the Department of Housing and Urban Development took notice. A federal review was launched targeting how city agencies handled elder-owned Black properties. Yvonne testified in Washington not long after. She stood in front of a Senate subcommittee, her blazer sharp, her voice steady, and her tone unmistakably personal. "I am not here just as a legal expert," she said. "I am here as a daughter of a woman who was almost erased because a spreadsheet didn't have a soul." Her words entered the congressional record. Outside the hearing, a young aide stopped her. Black girl, early 20s, natural hair pulled into a neat bun. "My grandma cried watching your mom's clip," she said. "She thought nobody saw her house anymore." Yvonne hugged her. "Tell her we see it now." And they did. Home ownership clinics named for Clara popped up in places as small as Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and as big as Philadelphia. Churches began dedicating parts of their ministries to home advocacy. Even HBCUs started new scholarship funds tied to housing justice, focusing especially on aging Black women-led households. One letter came from as far away as Ghana. It read in careful cursive, "Dear Mrs. Clara, we watched your story in our village. We know what it is like to be forgotten by land. Thank you for reminding us that roots must be protected." Clara didn't keep all the letters, but she kept that one folded in her Bible. Back home, the porch network had outgrown Clara's actual porch. What began as a few folding chairs now had an office, 2 blocks over, funded by small donors, church partners, and unexpected allies. Their motto was simple: if they built it, we protect it. Yvonne became its national director. But Clara, she remained its soul. Every month she showed up to the office, not to speak, not to consult, just to sit in a chair near the front window, watching, listening. "You still got questions, baby?" she'd ask newcomers. "All right then, we'll figure it out." When a young organizer once asked why she kept coming, she answered, "Because I still remember what it felt like to be forgotten." That answer echoed deeper than any headline ever could. One quiet afternoon, a group of college students from Howard University drove up to see the porch. They weren't loud or flashy. They brought no cameras, just notebooks, curiosity, and reverence. Clara made tea. Yvonne gave the tour. They asked thoughtful questions about deeds, home trust options, the pressure of gentrification. But one young man, tall and serious-eyed, asked Clara directly, "What made you call your daughter that day, Ms. Beaumont? You could have just walked away." Clara leaned back and looked across the yard as if seeing a younger version of herself through the trees. "I remembered who I was," she said slowly, "even when they tried to make me forget, and I figured my daughter would remember too." Yvonne turned away so they wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. The students stayed for hours. That night, Clara sat alone on her porch under a blanket. The stars above felt especially close. And for the first time in a long while, she whispered to the wind, "Frank, I hope you see this." Because deep down, everything had been for him, for Yvonne, for the porch, for memory. But now it was for all of them. A year passed. The city erected a community memorial in an open park 2 blocks from Maple Street. Not in Clara's name, but in honor of Black matriarchs of the block. 5 benches, one for each decade between 1950 and 2000. Each had the engraved names of neighborhood women, some still living, some long gone. Clara's name was listed on the 1970s bench. The day of the unveiling, she stood before it with her daughter and neighbors. People cheered, music played, speeches were given. But Clara only nodded. When a reporter asked how she felt, she said, "We're finally sitting in the place they tried to move us from. That's all I ever wanted." Later, she and Yvonne walked back to the porch, arm in arm. "You ready to rest, Mama?" Yvonne asked. Clara smiled. "Child, I've been resting. That's why I'm still here." And then she sat down, just as she always had, and watched the street breathe. How many stories have we let slip into silence simply because they weren't loud, angry, or easy to retweet? Clara Beaumont didn't demand justice with fists. She didn't protest with placards. She didn't go viral with anger. She simply sat on a porch, in the last place she was remembered. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something we have dangerously forgotten. That legacy lives in stillness. That dignity doesn't require permission. That Black women, especially our elders, carry the memory of America even when America tries to forget them. This story was never just about one house in Lancaster County. It's about thousands of homes, tens of thousands of women, millions of hours spent cleaning, feeding, teaching, and praying on porches that generations walked past, never knowing what was being held together behind those screen doors. Clara's story is our call to remember, to check on our elders, to fight quietly and fiercely for our rightful place, to sit still when the world tries to erase us. And if you've made it this far, then I ask something of you now, not for Clara, not for me, but for the countless women like her, still waiting to be remembered. Go visit the porch of an elder in your family or neighborhood, ask for their story, listen, and write it down. Make sure they know their name still matters. Help them protect their home. Help them protect their memory. Because the next time the system tries to slap a red sticker on a door, it should have to go through all of us. We've spent too long letting policy replace people. Let's flip that script. Right now, if this story moved, you let it mean something. Like it, share it, talk about it, read it out loud to someone who needs it. And most importantly, subscribe to the Black Women channel. We don't tell stories for sympathy, we tell them to build strength. We're here to remember out loud. Because as Clara said herself, I don't seek justice to be famous. I just want a place where my memory can stay. Let's make sure there's a place for all of them.